Good morning to you all. Welcome to the West Ham Voice on a Friday morning. I hope you're all looking forward to a great weekend. It's going to be a great weekend, isn't it? Because the game against Arsenal on Wednesday has set us up nicely for the game against Brentford this coming Saturday. Well, I hope so, and I'm sure you all do too. What a difference a good win against what's considered to be one of the so-called Big Six teams does for the morale of West Ham United and its fan base. I can't imagine any West Ham fan being upset with a Carabao Cup 3-1 win over Arsenal on Wednesday night. Can you? Look, I say that tongue in cheek because, ironically, I did read some comments on social media after the Everton game that said that fans would have been happy to lose against Arsenal if it meant Moyes losing his job. Look, to be quite honest with you, I would never advocate for a West Ham defeat, regardless of what the outcome might be of it. But look, even if we did lose against Arsenal, would it have led Moyes to being one step closer to the sack? Possibly, but I no longer think that Moyes' immediate tenure as manager of West Ham relies only on results. Moyes could be treading on thin ice for a number of other factors as well, and I'll explain those in a moment. But just for a minute, cast your minds back to the beginning of the season where things looked pretty good. Fresh from the feel-good factor of winning a trophy for the first time in over 40-odd years, we had a very good transfer market, spent our money wisely. Our transfer activity is likely to have been given a 10 out of 10 by many fans if we'd actually managed to get a decent striker through the door. However, that aside, we started the season really well. We were playing well, winning games, picking up points. Players were performing, goals were being scored quite freely. And I even went as far as praising the likes of Mikel Antonio, who seemed to have had a new lease of life. That didn't last long. There were no major conflicts or dramas, either on or off the pitch. And every time I asked Sean for any juicy gossip to discuss, well, he kept telling me there's nothing. All was quiet on the West Ham front. In fact, anything worthy of note really took place during the transfer window, where in addition to the 1,000,001 players we were linked to, the only other news story of any worth was that of Lucas Paqueta being investigated for betting abnormalities, which of course he's pleaded his innocence on. Now, when there isn't anything juicy to discuss or anything controversial, viewers tend to sort of like switch off a little bit. Bad news sells, doesn't it, to be quite honest with you? So I thought to myself, look, perhaps West Ham United, after winning a trophy, starting off the season well, West Ham perhaps have reached a state of nirvana. Well, how wrong was I? After all, this is West Ham we're talking about, and we should always be aware that a bad news story is only just around the corner. And of course, we've had our fair share over the past couple of weeks, haven't we? The 3 poor defeats against Villa, Olympiacos and Everton. And then we heard that David Moyes had turned down a new contract and that we could potentially lose him for nothing at the end of this season. And then, of course, we heard that Vanessa Gold is looking to sell some of the shares that she inherited from her late father. Look, the Vanessa Gold story isn't really necessarily a negative one, but it has, of course, opened up the old news that the Qataris are about to come in, buy her shares in order to prep themselves for a major takeover of the club. I wouldn't hold your breath on that happening anytime soon, by the way. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to focus on David Moyes and the threat that he could be sacked, partly because of the 3 poor results prior to the Arsenal game, but also because of the January transfer window, which is coming up fairly soon. Look, the 3 defeats inevitably resurrected all the old noises amongst some sections of the fan base. Moyes has got to go because he's lost the dressing room again and the players aren't playing for him. They're down tools yet again. Plus, the 6 defeats in a row rule has reared its ugly head again. Now, if you remember last season, there was a suggestion that if David Moyes had lost 6 league games in a row, he would have been sacked. And apparently, that's back again. So despite the Arsenal win, we are 3 games into a potential 6 games in a row defeat in the league. Look, the information I've received at the beginning of the week, before the Arsenal game was played, is that there is indeed some disquiet about Moyes and his approach to games and his approach to players and team selections and so on. Like most of us, David Sullivan couldn't understand the so-called logic of resting players for the Olympiacos game, only for those rested players to have put in such an insipid performance against Everton on the following Sunday. With the money that we spent in the transfer market, Sullivan wants to see a return on his investment and for the best team to be put out on the pitch at all times. So when underperforming players are still being selected for league games, Sullivan would indeed have concerns and will have questions wanting answered as to why the players that we bought in the summer haven't been starting regularly in the Premier League. And with the January transfer window looming, Sullivan won't want to spend yet more money on players if it's going to take David Moyes 2 or 3 months to acclimatise those players in Premier League football. What would be the point of buying yet more talent if under Moyes he isn't intent on playing that talent and instead focusing on what many fans say are his core, key, favourite players, regardless of their form? And in one area in particular of major significance is, of course, what I've mentioned already, the striker position. Look, early in the season, I suggested that maybe we didn't need to get a striker. David Moyes has suggested that potentially he could convert Jared Bowen from the winger role to the striker berth, a conversion which has worked well in the past. Got to be honest, he transformed both Arnautovic and Antonio into strikers. But can that approach continue to always work? Or should David Moyes be seriously looking at bringing in a natural striker, a natural goal scorer? In the game against Arsenal, Bowen did prove how just effective he can be leading the line. He was superb. There's no doubt about that. But despite Moyes suggesting he might have used Bowen in this way, it's taken Moyes 3 months of this season to get to that stage. Because he's stuck with Mikel Antonio up front despite his poor form. Will Antonio be back leading the line against Brentford on Saturday? You bet your bottom dollar he will. You can almost guarantee that he will. And it won't guarantee anywhere near the kind of performance that we saw against Arsenal on Wednesday night. I hope I'm wrong. I really do. I hope, if Antonio plays, we play with the same vigour as we did against Arsenal on Wednesday. But unfortunately, Antonio hasn't scored a goal since Brighton away, which was at the end of August. That's a whole 2 months and something like 9 appearances where Antonio's not found the net. So if no other business is done in January, surely we must be looking at bringing a striker to the club sooner rather than later. And here is where I think Moyes could be on that sticky wicket amidst concerns that there could be an upcoming power struggle over transfer business in January. Moyes, in the past, has stated that he doesn't like doing business in January. It's not easy to get the players he wants. And if they were available, they would be more expensive. And that than they might be in the summer, etc., etc. After being at West Ham for around 4 years, Moyes has been unsuccessful in finding a replacement for Sebastian Haller throughout his tenure. All right, we got Scamacca in and we got Ings in, but neither of those players fit the David Moyes system that he likes to play. So here we have a scenario when we all know we need a striker, not only in order to continue challenging in all the competitions that we're in, but also to provide an alternative to the flailing Antonio. But for this January transfer window, we have another influencer in the mix, and that, of course, is Tim Steidten. Now, look, I know Steidten was here for the summer window as well, but it was widely accepted that given Moyes still had a year left on his contract in the summer, he would have had final say over players coming and going from the club. But now, with just 7 months to go, and there'll be something like 5 months to go when the January window opens, before Moyes' contract expires, his overall ruling on player transfers looks like it's starting to diminish, with Tim Steidten being allowed to do the job that he was actually brought in to do, which, as I said, is to create a better team, but that could also create a power struggle and conflict between the two men. Now, I know, again, we heard a similar story in the last summer that when Steidten was new, he was still learning about the Premier League, but there was a power struggle there. But I think there was an understanding that Steidten was new and that struggle wasn't quite as ominous as maybe it might be in January. 6 months into his job, Steidten will have now a pretty decent idea on what is required to improve the squad. I was told earlier in the week that David Sullivan has been so impressed with Steidten as a sporting director, which is why he's now receiving more plaudits within the club for his influence on the signings that we brought in and for being a major part of the process to get Jared Bowen to sign a long-term deal. Now, Bowen has spoken about his excitement to be part of the project that West Ham are forging. So surely that project has to be the vision of Steidten being put forward, because he's only just arrived rather than anything to do with David Moyes, given that he's only got a few months left on his contract. Steidten is here. And as I said before, in previous videos, he talked before he joined West Ham, he talked about wanting to look for a new long-term project and to have a big say in shaping a future club. And this is, I think, is what's going to happen. And it's going to start in earnest from January, when Steidten has a bigger say in transfers than he had done in the summer. I was told that Steidten is now Sullivan's new confidant, his new number 2, which, if true, I would imagine would kind of rub up David Moyes the wrong way as well. So with the January transfer window looming, Moyes has been told that he's got to work alongside Steidten, not to create any blocks which would hinder the sporting director from doing his job effectively. It sounds as if David Moyes is on notice. It looks that Steidten has been given the remit to control transfers and have a much bigger say than he did in the summer. But it won't stop there, because Sullivan will also not tolerate just lip service from Moyes, by Moyes agreeing to transfer targets offered by Steidten, only for Moyes to leave them, as I've said before, languishing on the subs bench, which he has a habit of having done in the past. So as I mentioned earlier, Moyes' future doesn't depend on results. And for all we know, the results could improve immensely, just like the result against Arsenal on Wednesday. But Moyes' immediate future is also relying on how he demonstrates a good working relationship with Steidten. But if Moyes doesn't play ball, Steidten has been asked to draw up a list of potential suitable candidates for the manager's role. Now, I would have imagined that Steidten would have been doing this anyway for the summer, because I just don't think David Moyes, if he does stay until the summer, won't be given a new contract. However, it could be possible that if there is conflict leading up to the January transfer window, that maybe Steidten will be doing his job in looking for a new manager sooner rather than later. Look, have a great weekend, everyone. If you're new to the channel, you know what to do. Hit the like button, subscribe button, and the bell notification. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all very soon.